What if I told you that Aussies staying single for longer or splitting up might actually be one of the reasons Australia is stuck in a housing crisis? Now, this does sound crazy, and I'm going to unpack this whole thing. Hey guys, Scott here. Now, I know that sounds like a stretch at first, because when we talk about the housing crisis, we usually blame the big obvious things: migration, supply shortages, interest rates, government policy failures. And don't get me wrong, all of those matter. I spend most of my time analyzing those factors with my co-founder, who's one of Australia's leading property analysts and data minds. We go through the numbers, the forecasts, and the structural problems almost every single day. But recently, while digging into the population and demographic data, we came across something that almost nobody is talking about, even though it quietly changes how housing demand actually works in this country. It looks small on the surface, it sounds like a social trend, not an economic one, but when you connect the dots, you realize it reshapes how many homes we need, what type of homes we need, and when people are actually ready to buy them. This is not just about supply versus demand anymore. It is about the kind of demand that we have and whether the homes we keep building actually match how Australians are living today. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through one overlooked demographic trend, what the data really says, and how it is quietly feeding into the housing crisis we're all dealing with. Quick one before we start: if you want simple, straight talk breakdowns on property and the economy, hit subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss one of my videos. I do these videos every single day. Okay, let's get into it. For decades, Australia's housing market was built around a very predictable life path. People partnered young, got married, started families, and then moved into bigger homes in the outer suburbs. That cycle literally shaped how we planned cities and what kind of homes we built. But that life path is changing. Marriage rates in Australia have been falling for years. In the early 2000s, around 7 people per 1,000 got married each year. Today, that number sits closer to 5. Marriage has not disappeared, but is no longer the default path for everyone. What matters even more is when people are marrying. 20 years ago, nearly half of marriages involved people under 30. Today, that number is far fewer. More Australians are marrying in their mid to late 30s, and many are staying single for much longer. This matters for housing because partnering is one of the biggest triggers for buying a family home. When people marry in their 20s, they often start planning for kids, schools, and space. That usually means looking for a 3 or 4 bedroom home in the outer suburbs. But when people delay partnering, they do not stop needing housing. Instead, they stay in smaller homes for longer. They rent for longer. They live in 1 and 2 bedroom places well into their 30s. So demand does not disappear, it gets reshaped and pushed later in life. Now here is the part that surprises most people. We often hear that half of all marriages end in divorce and that divorce is becoming more common. But the data actually shows the opposite. Divorce rates are falling. Now, at a first glance, that sounds positive. It feels like marriages must be stronger. But when you put falling divorce rates next to falling marriage rates, the story changes completely. You cannot get divorced if you never get married. What has really changed is that more Australians are choosing de facto relationships instead of formal marriages. Those relationships still form and break apart, but they do not show up in the divorce statistics. Historically, divorce played a role in housing demand. When a couple split, one household often became 2. That increased demand for rentals, smaller homes, and entry-level properties. Now, with fewer formal marriages and fewer formal divorces, housing demand doesn't vanish, those trends don't vanish, it just looks differently in the stats. Instead of sharp life events forcing housing moves, people drift between rentals, share housing, or stay in smaller dwellings for much longer. So demand is still there, it just does not arrive in the same way or at the same age as it used to. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, Scott, I get the trends, but how does this actually change housing? Let me break it down for you. First, household sizes stay smaller for longer. In the past, living alone or in a small apartment was a short transition phase. People moved out in their early 20s, shared with friends, partnered up, and upgraded fairly quickly. Now that phase can last a decade or more. Many people live alone or as a couple in 1 or 2 bedroom homes well into their late 30s. Smaller households are no longer a stepping stone, they are the norm. That trend increases long-term demand for studios, 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom dwellings, while reducing urgency for detached family homes. Second, the rental phase stretches out. People rent longer, not just because housing is expensive, but because life milestones are now delayed. Singles rent, de facto couples rent, even high income earners delay buying because they do not want to lock in a family-sized home yet. More long-term renters means ongoing pressure on rental supply, even when demand for family homes softens. Third, family home demand shifts later and becomes thinner. People still want family homes, but they want them later. Instead of buying at 28 or 30, many arrive at that stage at 38 or 42. By then, the pool of buyers is smaller and more selective. So again, demand does not disappear, it arrives later and in fewer numbers. Now this is where it really starts to matter. If you look at Australia's existing housing stock, the mismatch becomes obvious. Studios and one-bedroom homes make up only about 6% of the total housing stock. Two-bedroom dwellings make up around 19%. Meanwhile, 75% of homes in Australia are 3- and 4-bedroom houses, mostly built for a life cycle that starts much earlier than it does today. So when more people need smaller homes for longer, demand piles into that part of the market that only makes up about a quarter of total supply. This is key if you're a property investor. You've got to understand the types of properties and the size of properties that will have most demand and the most growth. Now this creates intense pressure on rentals and prices for 1- and 2-bedroom dwellings, especially in employment hubs in city centers. And in fact, when people cannot buy those homes because supply is tight or prices rise too fast, they stay renting. When rental supply is too tight, rents rise even further. This is why smaller dwellings in good locations are increasingly expected to outperform large homes on the fringe. This is not just about affordability. This is a structural mismatch between how Aussies live and what we keep building. Just ask a young working professional who's on the hunt for a 1-bedroom apartment and whether or not they can even find one to rent or to buy. Almost impossible. This is why the housing crisis cannot be explained by one factor alone. Migration boosts population, but household formation tells you how many homes are needed, what type of homes are needed, and when they are needed. When people partner later, stay single longer, and live in smaller households for more years, the entire housing system feels the strain in new places first. Australia's population is still growing strongly, but households are forming much differently. The Australian dream is not dead, it's just delayed, and it's a little bit different. And that delay is quietly reshaping the housing market right in front of us. If you found this useful, hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you do not miss my next update. This was your daily property update, your 5 to 8 minute update on the property market and the economy, so you can stay ahead of the curve, stay ahead of the market, and think like a property insider. I'll see you guys at the next video.